Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Hollywood PANICS. Streamers confirm no one is watching or rewatching hundreds of woke TV shows. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from Breitbart, data confirms no one's watching hundreds of woke streaming shows. And from Variety, streaming viewership data shows steep drop-off after top originals. So with all of the millions, and it's really not millions, it's billions of dollars these streaming services are spending on new shows, outside of a few top shows, no one's watching them. And then even with the top shows, people don't tend to rewatch those shows like they do classic shows. There are like no new classics actually being made. From Breitbart, data confirms no one's watching hundreds of woke streaming shows. Data revealed by Variety in March confirmed that other than the top 20 shows, pretty much no one is watching any of the woke crap on America's lousy streaming services. And this was something that I had the greatest concern for, that the streaming services would somehow get control over what we see produced, and that it wouldn't really be like a fair marketplace of ideas, where we pay them money every month on a subscription basis, they take that revenue, they do whatever they do with it, and essentially say, well, look, as long as we have this revenue coming in, we can do whatever kind of content we want, and you're stuck as a subscriber supporting us. Until recently, we really didn't even see a lot of published data on how successful these individual shows are. Now we're starting to see more and more of that data. But the way these streaming services get away with producing whatever content they want is by giving subscribers no other option than to just accept whatever it is they decide to produce. But at the same time, there's something not right about the accounting with these shows, because if they produce these shows and they say, okay, well, they have a life of, 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, and we can work it out so that our cost seems to work and report that cost to shareholders, they don't seem to be acknowledging the massive losses that they're actually taking, because wait till you see the actual data of all of the shows they're producing. Very few of them actually get watched and then rewatched. So if the shows aren't going to get rewatched, what's the value of any of these shows they're producing? The accounting is actually way off, and at some point there will be a reckoning for all of this. In the meantime, we get stuck with a lot of garbage TV shows and things like Cleopatra, where they hire a black actress to push an agenda rather than trying to make something that actually fits within reality and people's expectations. Quote, as series output soared to historic highs in 2022, with nearly 1,000 original titles released on the major streaming platforms, the useless far-left Variety reported, without ever explaining why, viewership on most services was concentrated among fewer than 24 shows. Do that math for a second. 1,000 original titles, but most of the actual viewership on the streaming platform is with fewer than 24 shows? Two dozen means 24. It's not a baker's dozen. It's not even 26. It's 24 shows out of 1,000. But they're not necessarily even part of the 1,000 original titles. Let's go on. Quote, data shows that the top 20 most watched TV seasons on every streaming service other than Netflix accounted for the vast majority of original series viewership on almost all the major US-based streaming platforms in 2022. Normal people know this already, but it's good to see the actual data. Quote, the drop-off between the top performing shows and the remainder is, if anything, even more striking according to the report. Disney Plus released 50 original series in 2022, and the 10 most popular series captured nearly 80% of original series viewing time, the next 10 just over 16%. 50 original series. Can you imagine how much money they spent on that? It's in the billions. The 10 most popular got 80% of the viewing, and then the next 10, 16%. So the rest of the 4% of the viewing is represented in the remaining 30 original series. Literally almost no one watching those. Disney seasons that were not in the top 20 accounted for only about 5% of viewing time, other than Peacock's 3%, that is the worst of all the major streamers. The following is by far the most important revelation, the all-important rewatchable factor. If you're a Star Trek fan, you've seen the original Star Trek episodes several times. How many times? Depends on how much free time you have. Do you like that show, The Office, Seinfeld, Breaking Bad? I could go watch Breaking Bad right now from beginning to end and enjoy this series all over again. But these new streaming shows are not producing anything like that. That's not only not watchable, it's also, of course, because it's not watchable, it's not rewatchable. Looking again at Disney Plus, only 2 of the top 10 original series in 2022 reappeared among the top 10 in the next year. The Mandalorian Season 2 and limited series Andor and both Star Wars properties. The former actually saw its share of viewing time rise year over year, likely bolstered by the 3rd season's premiere. And that's fine, they do a new season and it creates interest in a previous season. That's great, as long as people are actually interested in watching these series, but they're not. Even if people are watching the top 20 streaming shows once, almost no one goes back to watch them again. They are not producing new classics. So what are Americans actually rewatching? Pre-woke shows such as Suits, Friends, Grey's Anatomy, The Office, Seinfeld, Breaking Bad, Lost, the classic television shows that are actually entertaining, provocative, and offer subtext instead of straight text. Left-wing lectures, gay sex, men in dresses that we're required to take seriously, virtue signaling, diversity hires, nothing's funny, nothing's irreverent, nothing's fun. Instead of offering the pleasure of making us think, we're told what to think. It's all garbage. Cleopatra's a great example. Taking a historic figure and making them black just so you can say, hey, isn't it great we have a black queen, is a one-dimensional approach to storytelling. Representation does not make story. The woke people do not understand this. Story is a relatability for the characters in a situation. Story has little or nothing to do with looking like the person who's in the story. Characters need to face challenges and overcome them, or not overcome them. When we see ourselves in characters, it's because of how they're dealing with situations, not because they look like us. Representation is not storytelling. This is like storytelling for the 3rd grade or maybe the 4th grade. Children understand this. The woke people don't. And the Netflixes and the Disney Plus people and the Peacock people just sign off on it and move it along. And then people don't watch the shows. This is such a disaster waiting to happen when they actually go into the accounting and they realize, like, look, you can't say that this content is worthwhile if people aren't watching it. And then even if people do watch it, if they're not going to rewatch it, then you have to say, you know what, this is now worthless because there's no audience for it. We produced it. Some people sort of watched it, even their most popular shows. Just because they watch it once, if people are not willing to rewatch it, the value of those shows drops precipitously. The rejection of all this garbage is costing Hollywood billions. And think of the waste. Billions of dollars poured into thousands and thousands of hours no one will ever watch. It's all ether. It's as if it never existed. But the older stuff, going all the way back to the 1950s to the 1980s, people are still watching through outlets such as MeTV and Grit. In a perfect example of everything wrong with the entertainment business today. Remember War of the Roses, the 1989 movie that starred Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner? They just announced the remake with Olivia Colman and Benedict Cumberbatch. And as the author John Nolte says here, only an industry run by prudish lunatics would think that removing sex appeal from War of the Roses is a good idea. What's next? Baywatch Returns, starring Lizzo, Oprah, and a transvestite? And then John goes on to point us to Better Call Saul, which is a new-ish show. It's not from the 90s, it's not from the 80s, it was made recently. And John points this out. This is in a Facebook post. And he's got a lot of good things to say, and I suggest you check it out, but specifically how he talks about Gus. The way they handled Gus in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is the right way to handle a gay character. His sexuality has nothing to do with who he is. His love for his boyfriend, however, drives everything, and we can all relate to that. So gay or not gay, you can understand that your love for a significant other is enough to make you want to do things. Gus has an actual motivation. There's actual story for that actual character. And look how much story and how many characters come out of Gus's obsession with wanting to get revenge. But instead of focusing on story, instead of focusing on character, and Cleopatra was an amazing character, could have been an incredible story, they focus only on representation. And what's the result? Here's the result. From the Daily Mail, Netflix's Queen Cleopatra is panned by viewers as it receives a Rotten Tomatoes score of just 1% amid blackwashing row. The documentary, which is part of the African Queen series, is an exploration of the rise and fall of the last pharaoh of Egypt and was released on May 10th. It discusses issues such as her relationships and heritage, which is a subject of debate, as well as her political work. And this idea of blackwashing Cleopatra has got Netflix being sued for $2 billion by Egyptians for distorting the image of Cleopatra. The show has been subject to blackwashing claims after a black actress was cast in the lead role, despite historical records showing she was Macedonian Greek. After 4 days on Rotten Tomatoes, Queen Cleopatra has been given just 1% audience rating, reportedly the worst ever documented according to Forbes. Forbes said fans usually rate things higher than critics, even bad shows, and the point being a 1% audience score seems to borderline mathematically be impossible, even with the controversy the film has attracted. Producer Jada Pinkett Smith says she wanted to tell the story of Cleopatra because, quote, we don't often get to see or hear stories about black queens. So just make a fictional black queen, don't fictionalize a Macedonian Greek queen. In the trailer, which was released in April, it claims that Cleopatra was black with curly hair. One historian asserts in the preview, I remember my grandmother saying to me, I don't care what they tell you in school, Cleopatra was black. That's a good way to cite a reference. Just point at your grandmother. My grandmother said some things that today would be considered to be offensive, but I'm not going to get into it. That said, I'm not going to make her a historical expert. She was just my grandma. An Egyptian lawyer has followed a case with the country's public prosecutor demanding that Netflix be shut down. Cairo's former antiquities minister, Zahi Hawass, condemned the documentary as completely fake. They said Cleopatra was Greek, meaning that she was light-skinned, not black. This is also something to consider. There is more than one culture in the world. There is more than one race in the world. We know this. We should respect other people's cultures to the extent that it's possible to do that. So for Netflix to not direct Jada Pinkett Smith to cooperate with the Egyptian government doesn't seem like that makes a lot of sense. Not very respectful of other cultures. The antiquities minister said, quote, Cleopatra was Greek, meaning that she was light-skinned, not black. Zahi said the only rulers of Egypt known to have been black were the Kushite kings of the 25th dynasty. He said Netflix is trying to provoke confusion by spreading false and deceptive facts, that the origin of the Egyptian civilization is black. Well, I mean, they would do that for political reasons, and I'm sure he's quite right about that. He alleged that the show featured content that violated Egypt's media laws and accused Netflix of trying to promote the Afrocentric thinking, which includes slogans and writings aimed at distorting and erasing the Egyptian identity. Cleopatra was famously played by white English actress Elizabeth Taylor opposite Richard Burton as Mark Antony in the historical epic from 1963. 3 years ago, plans for a new movie about the Queen starring Israeli actress Gal Gadot sparked a backlash from people insisting the role should go to an Egyptian or African actress. Gal defended the decision, saying, we were looking for a Macedonian actress that could fit Cleopatra. She wasn't there, and I was very passionate about Cleopatra. The 2-minute official trailer uploaded on April 12th sparked so much controversy that Netflix was forced to turn comments off. One author tweeted, for the nth time, the Egyptian Queen Cleopatra was not an Egyptian. She was Greek. Cleopatra VII was white of Macedonian descent. Likewise, all the Ptolemy rulers who lived in Egypt. Another added, Netflix is yet again blackwashing a historical white character. This time it's Queen Cleopatra that is transformed into a black woman, despite that we know she was white, of Macedonian Greek descent, so was all the rulers of the Ptolemy dynasty. Another user commented, quote, blackwashing a Greek queen proves the obsession with white women, and this wouldn't help stopping racism at all. From Yahoo Finance, worst show ever, Queen Cleopatra debuts to a miserable 20.2 million streaming hours, 2% Rotten Tomatoes audience score. Entertainment really is a hit business. In publishing, we know that we might publish 10 things, and one thing that we publish is a hit, a couple of things are break-evens, and a lot of the other things are losses. That's very normal. It's also very normal for entertainment. Not every show is going to hit, but it shouldn't be that no shows hit. And it shouldn't be that these shows have such a common theme of trying to push ideology instead of give you good characters and give you story that you can get excited about. If none of the new shows, literally, basically none of the new shows are successful to the extent that people aren't interested in rewatching them again and again and again, what does that tell you? I mean, 1,000 new shows in 2022, you would think at least 5 or 10 of them, literally 5 or 10 out of 1,000 could become classics, could become shows that people would want to see again and again, but they're not. The concern for storytelling, the concern for characterization, the concern for making people passionate or think about or talk about a story, People will talk about Queen Cleopatra, people will talk about some of these woke shows to say how offensive and stupid they are, how unrealistic they are. Not because they get an idea from a show or make them think about their own life or their own relationships. That's what Star Trek did. That's what The Office did. That's what Breaking Bad did. It doesn't matter what the race is of the characters. It matters that the story is good. It matters that the characters are relatable and interesting. And if the new shows can't compete with the old shows, then there is no future for this kind of entertainment. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.